you guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm very excited for today's video. I have my 7th update in my No Pan Left Behind series, and I did have a successful month in terms of palettes completed. In terms of palettes that I was working on specifically in this project, I only have 2 out of my 6 that will be rolling out today, but I did complete 6 new eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection, No Pan Left Behind style, which if you're unfamiliar with what that means, it just means that I have used every single shade within an eyeshadow palette at least one time, and I am slowly working my way through my collection. I will have more information in the description box, but I have currently completed 47 eyeshadow palettes out of somewhere between 156 and 162. I can't remember the exact number, so not yet even through 1/3 of my palette collection, and I know we are over halfway through the year. I would like to make it through, I mean, obviously I'm gonna hit 50. If I could complete 75 eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection, that would feel extremely encouraging, and then try and get use out of, and try and touch every palette in my collection. Fingers crossed at least one time. I don't necessarily know that that's gonna happen, but if you're interested in my update, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love for you to consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. All right, you guys, I wanna start with the palettes that I completed but I wasn't working on within this project. I'm like 3 out of the 4. Nope. All 4 of the completed palettes were new palettes to my collection this year. And in order for me to be ready to review a palette, I want to complete the palette No Pan Left Behind style so that I know how every single shade within a palette performs before reviewing it. So up first, I have the MAC Encrypted Kryptonite 6-pan color palette. I ended up purchasing this palette because it was only like $10 more to purchase a palette of 6 shadows than it was to purchase a single eyeshadow, and I really wanted to have the shade Satin Taupe back in my life. And I will say there's one look. I will also post looks that I've created with this palette that I've taken pictures of. I'll post them over here to the side. There's one look that kind of was giving like rock star glam in my opinion, that I really enjoyed creating with this palette. I was worried how I was gonna get use out of this like blue shade, but I used that in that look. I will say MAC Satin Taupe is not everything I remember it to be, but I'm still glad to have this in my collection. It's definitely not going to be a most reached for palette, a most favorite palette, but from time to time it'll be fun to pull this out. Okay, then I also completed the newest palette to Diverune Cosmetics. It's this cute little 6-pan palette. This is the Dew Drops palette, and I had so much fun with this little 6-pan. I know like a shimmer palette is not going to be for everyone, or an all shimmer palette, and truly it's not. Like I would never just use an all shimmer palette to create a look, but it's nice to have a cute little 6-pan companion palette to kind of have. Now that my hair is like, I'm like, should I cut my hair? Right now it's, should I cut my hair? I think maybe I will. Weighing down below, should I cut my hair like this length? I'd probably cry, because I feel like inevitably I always cut my hair and then I like regret it. But anyway, back to the task at hand, which is this palette. I absolutely love Diverune's special shades. I think that they really do it right. Like they are so metallic, shifty, special. The shade Drip is just unlike anything else. I'm wondering if that's a holographic shade, because that's how it kind of reads on the lids. I'm really into this palette. The shade Splash is kind of like a marbled shade, so it kind of like has different colors and textures depending on like how it swatches. And the shade Splash is also this really beautiful like pink golden sort of multi-chrome. I am so into this palette. I'm so glad to have this. I also like when a palette is going to be an all shimmer palette, I like when it's like 6 pans. I feel like that's like the perfect amount. It's cute, sleek, compact, easy to travel with, but it's not like 12 shimmer shades. So I'm a big fan of this, and I will continue to dip into this even though I have completed that. A palette that I completed that I was not a big fan of was the Oden Spring Dragon palette. I feel so bad, but I'm just trying to like be truthful and be honest. I have just not been as impressed with the Oden's formula as I used to be. I feel like after the Christmas and Christmas Eve palette, for me, the quality of their palettes really started to decline pretty significantly. And I'm specifically talking about their matte shadows. Although I will say the Halloween 2 collection, I really, really loved, and I didn't have issues with any of those shades. But even like this palette, some of the like shimmer shades, I was just so unimpressed with. I really struggled with the shade Wood, which is just like a dark brown shade. So I'm surprised that that just did not work. It was patchy, it was muddy, and I did not think that this was a high quality palette, unfortunately. So, but nevertheless, I did complete that. And then the final palette before we get into the ones that were in this project, I finally completed my Easley Rain Flower Moon eyeshadow palette. This took forever for me to complete. I feel like I've had this since January or February of this year, I think. And I will say I've used a lot of, especially a lot of the top 2 rows, I've used many times, not just one time. In fact, I even have 2 pans already in this palette in these 2 shades. Granted, those are like more of like a smushy texture, or like a squishy texture, similar to like a Colourpop Super Shock shadow. But I have gotten a ton of use out of this palette. I drool for these top 2 rows of shimmers. I don't have any issues with the mattes. I will just say they're not like, aside from like these 2 greens, these are just like not my everyday, like not everyday colors that I'm gonna reach for. Not the typical mattes I find myself reaching for. And in terms of like creating just a singular look with this palette, yes, I can do it. And I have some looks to share. Oops. I have some looks that I will share over to the side here. But I mostly love having this palette to kind of use as a companion palette. And there are so many times where I've done a look and I'm just feeling like the look isn't quite to the level of like shiftiness or punchiness on the lids that I want. And I will reach into this palette for like a green. I've reached into this for a green a couple of times. The shade Sapling, I absolutely love it. It's this really beautiful teal sort of ethereal shade. I think it's so beautiful. Also, Sprout is another really beautiful kind of blue silver shifty ethereal shade that I love. Pink Moon, Bloom, and Freesia, oh my gosh, so beautiful for like a warm summer like pink or yellow look. Ugh, I literally could not recommend this palette enough. For me, even if it was just the top 2 rows, I think this palette would be worth it. Flower Moon is probably my favorite indie brand at this point. I just think their special shades are just, I don't even have words. I don't even have words. They are just unlike any other brand's formula that I've used, and they're so special. So I have completed this, but even after completing, I literally will like just dip in multiple times a week for specific shades. This week specifically, I've reached into like Bliss, Awakening, and Sapling because I was doing some green looks. I know I have a green look on today. I did not reach in to any of these today, although I'm like, should I add like, okay, I'm gonna add a little bit of Refresh right here just to try and like tie the yellow in with the green a little bit. Ooh, I actually do kind of like the way that like blends those colors in a little bit. Okay, all that to say, I am reaching for this palette constantly, even if it's just for like one shade to just add a little something to a look. I truly could not recommend this palette enough. If you are someone who likes a punchier lid, something shifty on your lid, a beautiful holographic on your lid, I think this palette is just truly special, and I'm happy that I've completed it, but I'll keep reaching for it. All right, that brings me to the 2 palettes in this project, or that I was working on in this project, that I have completed and will be rolling out. In this project, I work on 5 eyeshadow palettes that are randomly selected at any given time, and then I also choose 1 palette to work on. So the palette I chose to work on was the Colourpop Lemonciello palette, and I have completed this eyeshadow palette, and I'm so happy about that because this is one of my like top palettes in my collection, and I have loved this palette ever since this came into my collection. And that says something because I feel like oftentimes with Colourpop palettes, I'm really excited about the palette like at the beginning, but then maybe it's because it's like less expensive, I just don't value it as highly because it's less expensive than other palettes in my collection. And so I feel like oftentimes Colourpop palettes I like just kind of forget about over time. I'm not as excited about over time, and ultimately usually I end up decluttering. But this palette, I remember getting this palette. I think it was either 2020 or 2021. One of those 2 years, I can't remember. But we were going on a trip to South Dakota right after this palette came into my life, and I brought it with me to South Dakota, and I never looked back. This palette has pretty much come traveling with me anytime I travel, and I had so much fun creating looks with this. I will say, the shade Easy Peasy, in theory, I want to be my favorite shade in this palette. It kind of reminds me in the pan of ABH Sponsored from the ABH Jackie palette, like a beautiful green brown shade. On the lids, I find this to be a little bit lackluster, and that could be because now I have a lot of indie brands that I have tested and tried, and they just have such punchy shades. And so the first look that I created with this palette, I used that shade, and I was like, oh, like, am I like not loving this palette like I once did? But then I created a look using like the yellows in this palette, and I was like, okay. And then I did a look using Capri, which is the beautiful green, and I was like, oh yeah, like I still love this palette, and I'm very happy to have completed this one. I don't know that I completed this last year. No pan left behind, so it feels really good to complete a palette that I know I love, and just remind myself how much I love it, and give myself permission to just create looks solely using that palette. And then the final palette that I've completed this month is the palette that I used to create the look that I have on my lids today. This is the Sydney Grace Tiny Marvels palette. I'm so glad that this palette ended up in this project, because I feel like this is one of those palettes that is so special in my mind that I feel like I have to reserve it for special occasions, and therefore it gets less use. And so just putting this palette in this project and giving me permission to use this palette, I had so much fun, and I was just reminded at the quality, or like the level of quality that this palette has to provide. For my look today, I used the shade Walking Stick, and then I did use Spider to kind of like deepen up my outer crease. And then I used Scarab, which is like my favorite shade in this palette. It's such a beautiful blue brown shade, and I think it might be my top blue brown in my entire collection. There's one from Pat McGrath that I really love, but I think I like this one even better because it's not as flaky. Anyway, I have Scarab on like the outer kind of half of my eye, and then I went in with BB right here on the inner half, or like inner third of my lids. I used Web on the inner corner, and oh my gosh, Web is such a beautiful frosty inner corner highlight. I like want to keep working on Web and potentially try and hit pan on that, because I'm like, I really, really love that on the inner corner. And then I used the shade Mantis on my lower lash line, just to kind of add to the greenness of the look. And that is the look I have on my lids today. I will also share some looks over here. There's another look that I did using Arab and Fire Butts here. I was so in love with that look. I will definitely be recreating that one. There were a couple of shades in here that I reached for multiple times, so not just the one time. So the shade Web I actually ended up reaching for 3 times. And then I reached for Fire Butts twice. I reached for Scarab 3 times, and then I also reached for Death Moth twice and Spider twice as well. So although this is completed and I will be like putting it back in my collection, I definitely am I feel like this is like a really beautiful spring and then a really beautiful fall palette. It kind of leans both ways with like the lighter pastels. So I'm very excited to pull this back out for the fall and continue to use the shade Scarab, as well as continue to use the shade Web on my inner corner. I'm absolutely loving that. So this is complete, but we're gonna keep loving on it. All right, that brings me to the 4 eyeshadow palettes that I am still working on. So yes, I am still working on the Glamlite Cake palette, and I haven't created another look with this one. I will say I was like really working hard to enjoy as much time outside in July as possible. So like a lot of the times that I was doing my makeup was truly for work. Yes, I did film some like weekend mornings, but typically when I was filming on a weekend morning, I was trying to get use out of some of my new palettes, because I don't want my new palettes to just sit around. So for my Glamlite Cake palette, I've only created the one look. I used these 2 shades, these 2 shades, and then these 2 shades. So I still have a purple look in me, a pink/red look in me, a blue look in me, and then something probably neutral. I'm not decluttering this though. I really do like having this palette in my collection. I just am not reaching for these bright rainbow looks very often. Then I have my Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3, and as of the last update, I had reached for the shade Martian twice, and then Martian once and Solarian twice. This is one of my favorite palettes in my entire collection. This really did get me into like shifty duochromatic and multi-chrome shades. So I'm a little bit embarrassed to say I didn't reach for this palette at all since the last update. So I still have Polaris, which is one of my favorite shades in this palette to use. It actually has a pan. I have Strawberry Moon, Galaxy, Aurora, Soul, and Gaia. I don't know how to say this. Anyway, I do feel like this is a really, some of the shades that I have left will make really, really beautiful fall looks. So I'm thinking like even like end of August, beginning of September, kind of transitioning into fall. There's some looks that I have in mind for this. Really, really hoping that I can roll this out next update because I feel like this should be an easy one for me to roll out. And then the other two palettes to update you on did roll in last update, but I have not completed them. I'm just referencing my notes here. So at first I have the Huda Beauty Wild Tiger palette. I have reached for this twice, but I haven't completed the palette. So the shades that I've reached for are actually only these two shades right here. I've reached for this shade in the center once, and then I've reached for this shade right here twice. This like brown, like it's kind of like a metallic brown with like pink glitter in it. I think it's so beautiful, and I anticipate as I work my way through this palette, I will use this shade even more times than the 2 times that I already have. Hoping that I could potentially roll this one out next update as well. I feel like this is another one that would be a really good palette to like transition me into the fall. So that is that. And then I also rolled in last update the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette. So speaking of palettes that I feel like will be good for the fall, I feel like there's like too much dead space above my head, so I'm really sorry about that. I'm feeling better about now that we're at the end of the video about this. All right, so my Too Faced Pumpkin Spice I've reached for 4 total times, but I've reached for the shade Whipped Cream 4 times, and then I have also reached for the shade Love You a Latte right here 1 time. So I have not reached for this palette much at all. I haven't created a full look with this palette yet. And this is actually another perfect palette. I feel like that will be a great transition into the fall. I mean, pumpkin spice. I'm sure the pumpkin spice is probably already out at Starbucks. Like, I feel like I love fall. I really do. But as a Minnesota girly, it's like I want to soak up every last moment of the summer that I can. So like, can we just hold off on the pumpkin spice lattes until like September 1st? It's really all I'm asking for. And then can fall really stretch into like December for us, like right up until the week before Christmas. Then the snow can start, and then it can end like January 2nd. My daughter and I were in a great debate yesterday over our favorite months of the year. She had the audacity to say that she likes the months of January and February. I was like, girl, you are absolutely crazy. All right, that being said, we do get to roll in 2 new palettes. One will be of my choosing, and then one will be randomly generated for us. So let's randomly generate the palette first so we know like what is randomly being selected for us, and then I will pick one. Okay, I have my Tiny Decisions app pulled up. My phone is always on silent, but I've turned it off to silent so we can hear. Oh, I could have turned it up a little bit more. Oops, that's turning it down. Okay, Sugar Pill Fun Size, but I'm gonna re-roll because obviously, no, because then it will like black it out. Like it won't do a re-roll. Okay. The wheel wants what the wheel wants. All right, I suppose if this is going to be rolled in, I swear I completed this earlier this year. Maybe it was just last year that I'm remembering. Like if I'm going to be completing this, it is gonna be in the warmer weather months. So this is really my last opportunity. So I'm gonna be rolling in the Sugar Pill Fun Size palette. I do really love having this palette in my collection. In fact, I attribute this palette to my like, not love of color, because I wouldn't say I'm like a color lover, but me like becoming more interested or more comfortable or just wanting to dabble a little bit more with color, or not always doing just like a mauve look or a brown look. And I'm excited to play around with this one. I feel like I've definitely reached for this a couple of times already this year. I feel like I completed this. Why am I feeling that way? I definitely have not. Like I definitely haven't, right? We're gonna say no, and even if I have, I guess we're doing it again. So this is the palette that is going to be randomly selected, and then I get to pick one. What do I want to pick? All right, I'm gonna pick Clarity So Amazing, and the reason I'm gonna pick this one is I really need to figure out if I like the matte pastels in here, or if I really just keep this palette around for these shimmer shades. I love the shade Don't Be Shellfish. It has a pan in it. and I've continued to reach for this as an inner corner highlight. It is such a beautiful yellow shifty inner corner highlight. I absolutely love this shade. I never want to be without this in my collection. Thankfully, I have so much pan. Like, I don't think I'll ever be able to use that up. And I love the shade Oh Ship. And actually, I've used I Washed Up like this recently, and I liked that too. But I need to figure that out, because if not, I'd rather just like depot this palette. It's a large palette to have. It's cute. It is really cute, but I just want to figure out, like, am I just keeping this around for a few shades that I can depot, or do I actually like the palette as a whole? And if I don't use this palette in the month of August, like, this doesn't scream fall or winter to me. So I'm going to be rolling in the Clarity Somber Amazing. I may end up regretting this, but this will be the 6th and final palette that will be entering this project. So that being said, my 2 hopes for next month, I still think, because Too Faced Pumpkin Spice is literally 18 shades, it might be a stretch. We'll see if I can complete this. My hope would be that I can roll out at least the Danessa Myricks and the Huda Wild, as well as, we better be rolling these 2 out, because I just said summer is like my last chance. So would love to have 4 rollouts. Next update, we'll see. But that is going to wrap up and conclude today's video. As always, if you do something like this, I would like to know maybe your favorite and least favorite palettes that you have completed this year. Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. Also, if you do this and like post your looks on Instagram, I love getting tagged in those too. I know there's a couple of you that tag me on Instagram, and I love looking at your looks because it gives me so much inspiration for looks that I want to create as well. So thank you guys as always for your support on my channel and this project. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.